Hey, how's it going, folks? Welcome to the next instalment of the Master and Margarita. I'm Cams Campbell, your host, and today we're looking at chapters 19 to 22. So how did you get on with it? How are you enjoying these wacky characters, eh? Right, let's get into it. I'm going to read out the essay I've written for Substack. I might ad-lib a little bit as I go and fix some typos as well. This will be going out as a video on YouTube as well as a podcast and an essay. So you've got 3 different ways of consuming it. And I will be putting out a print version, a PDF, which you can download and print. It gets rid of all the images, although that's a shame because the images are fantastic. But it gets rid of the images, just gives you text so you can print it and read it offline, which is a nice thing to be able to do. So thank you also to those who gave me some feedback last week when I asked about whether all of these different media types were useful. It turns out they are. So I'm more than happy to provide them. I actually enjoy doing this. I find it fun, except when the cat interrupts me, as I'm sure she's just about to do because she's skulking about in the hallway. So you might get to see Willow if you're lucky. Anyway, let's go through the essay for this week. I've got a subtitle here, which is a quotation from this week's section. Why have you gilded your whiskers? And why the devil do you need a tie if you've got no trousers on? Out of context, that's pretty funny, isn't it? Right, so this week, 45 pages, nice and easy. This is the 5th instalment of 8. So we're starting the 2nd month. And that's it. That's the preamble. Follow me, reader. Za mной, читатель. Chapter 19. Margarita is formally introduced. Margarita Nikolaevna, which means daughter of Nikolai. She's married and wealthy. Here's the footnote from the Pevere and Volokhonsky translation. The name Bulgakov gives to his heroine recalls that of Gretchen, diminutive of Margaret, the young girl ruined by Faust in Goethe's drama. It may also recall Marguerite de Valois, 1553 to 1615, wife of French King Henry IV, known as La Reine Margot. Several times in later chapters, Margarita will be called Margot and even Queen Margot. End of footnote. In Scotland, the diminutive Greta is sometimes used for Margaret. And still on the first page, we get this interesting little phrase. Margarita Nikolaevna never touched a Primus stove. It's such a short phrase, but there's a lot of meaning packed into the word Primus. Let's unpack it. In an earlier footnote from chapter 4, the Pevere and Volokhonsky translation has this to say. The shortage of living space after the revolution led to the typically Soviet phenomenon of the communal apartment, in which several families would have 1 or 2 private rooms and share a kitchen and toilet facilities. This led to special psychological conditions among people and to a specific literary genre, the communal apartment story, which still flourished in Russia. The Primus stove, a portable 1-burner stove fueled with pressurised benzene, made its appearance at the same time and became a symbol of communal apartment life. Each family would have its own Primus. The old wood, or more rarely coal-burning ranges, went out of use but remained in place. The general problem of living space, and the Primus stove in particular, plays an important part throughout the Moscow sections of the Master and Margarita. So it's an important feature of the novel. For contemporary Russian readers, this word would have conveyed all that meaning, and it's a shame that only the Pevere and Volokhonsky translation has made any mention of this. I think it's meaningless without an explanation. I suppose the next line, quote, Margarita Nikolaevna did not know the horrors of living in a shared apartment, end quote, does give it some context, and curious readers could take to the internet to find an explanation of Primus with a capital P, or Primus with a small p, depending on your translation, unless you're reading the Michael Glennie translation, in which he simply says, Margarita never had to cook, which translation loses all kinds of meaning. And in my essay here, I've got an image of a statue in bronze of two characters, Karoviev and Behemoth. And Behemoth is carrying a Primus stove. It's done by the artist sculptor Alexander Rukavishnikov. There's more about that to come later. Pool quote. What did she need, this witch with a slight squint in one eye who adorned herself that time in spring with mimosas? Willow's coming to interrupt proceedings, so we'll say hi and then I'll put her out because she might spill my coffee or she might stick her arse on the space bar, stop the recording, which she's done before. It's kind of annoying. So do you want to say hi? Little Willow, say hi to my viewers. So for audio listeners this won't work so well, but you will hear the purring. But if you want to see Willow, you're better coming on to the video. Isn't she lovely? Willow's our Bengal cat. And our mummy is away at the horses. So normally she'd be pestering mummy and not daddy. Okay, come on, time to go. Margarita goes to the master's rooms to discover that he's not there. She pines for him, not knowing whether he's alive or dead. On the day following the magic show that had caused all the chaos in Moscow, Margarita awakens around midday. She's had a dream of the master in a dreary, hellish spot. She sees the dream either as a premonition of her own death or as a sign that they will meet again soon. Her husband is away on business for 3 days. She drinks tea and then sits in a dark room in her house where she takes out an old leather album in which is a photograph of the master, a savings bank book, rose petals and the master's scorched notebook that she'd removed from the fire. She sits a while reading from the burned notebook and staring at the photograph. As she's getting ready to go out, her maid tells her about the chaos in Moscow after the magic show, with women running all over town naked after their expensive French clothing had disappeared. This makes Margarita laugh, and me as well. She doesn't believe the tall tales that her maid is telling her and gives her a pair of stockings and a bottle of perfume, imploring her not to go into town wearing only the stockings. Margarita leaves and listens to a conversation on the bus. Two citizens are discussing a coffin from which the corpse's head was stolen. They're going to the cremation at 2 that afternoon. Margarita gets off the bus and sits on a bench by the Kremlin. She remembers it was a year ago to the day that she sat on the bench with the master. Is that how long ago that he was huckled? That means Margarita has been having an affair with the master for at least a year, and he wrote his pilot story that long ago. So was Voland quoting from the master's manuscript at Patriarch's Ponds? Margarita thinks to herself, quote, if you've been exiled, then why on earth don't you let me know about you? After all, people do let others know. End quote. This makes me think of the phrase, quote, without right of correspondence, end quote. A Stalinist-era euphemism in the Soviet Union, ostensibly meaning confinement in a labour camp, but actually signifying death by firing squad. She hears drum beats approaching and the sounds of trumpets. It's Berlioz's funeral procession. She thinks to herself, quote, oh, I truly pawn my soul to the devil just to find out if he is alive or not. I wonder who that is they're burying with such extraordinary faces. End quote. A voice coming from beside her informs her that it's Berlioz. A man has sat down on the bench unnoticed. The narrator tells us that Margarita thought these thoughts to herself, so how could there be an answer? She must have absent-mindedly spoke out loud. Aye, right. It turns out that it's Azazello. He's carrying the chicken bone from earlier on in his jacket pocket. Remember the roast chicken that he beat Poplavsky with in chapter 18? He explains to Margarita that Berlioz's head had gone missing from the coffin at Griboyedov. Margarita asks if the critic Latunsky is in the procession. Remember, it was with him that the master had issues regarding his manuscript and its publication. Azazello points out Latunsky and addresses Margarita by name. She's taken aback and expresses her surprise. Azazello tells her he's been sent to invite her to pay a call on a foreigner that evening. She walks away, whereupon Azazello recites a line from the master's manuscript. Margarita's a bit freaked out, understandably. Azazello goes on to confirm that the master is still alive and that the foreigner she's been invited to call upon is not looking for sex or anything of that sort. As soon as Margarita learns that she'll find out more about the master if she agrees, she does so right away. Azazello gives her a gold canister filled with ointment and instructs her to apply it to her face and naked body at exactly 9:30, then wait by the phone for a call at 10. Chapter 20, Azazello's Cream. And I've got an image here of Azazello handing Margarita the magic cream by artist Yevgeny Grichin. And I'll just put in a wee sidebar here. If you go to bulgakovart.com, you'll see an incredible amount of artworks on this novel. It's really a fantastic place to spend some time, and that's where I get all of the images for my essays. Every single artist that I've looked at so far has an image of this scene with Margarita and Azazello on the bench with the cream. So it's a key moment in the novel. The motif of magical ointment, which when rubbed into the skin gives a person miraculous properties, invisibility, the ability to fly, rejuvenation, healing, etc., is very ancient. It is associated with beliefs about sorcerers and witches, and often human blood is included in the recipe for such an ointment. It is no coincidence that the ointment is given to Margarita by Azazello, who, according to myth, is a negative cultural hero. He taught men warfare and women the arts of debauchery. It's a full moon. That seems portentous, and indeed it is. Margarita's at home. I love the vibe here, the smouldering cigarette stub, the underwear thrown over a chair, the perfume. It feels normal, warm, welcoming, romantic even. But we know that the supernatural is waiting to enter the scene. Margarita is watching the seconds tick by, and the sense of anxiety builds as 9:30 approaches. The cream smells of marsh slime. Cads. She applies it to her face, and now we're on a trip. And it is a trip. Quote, the cream spread easily and, as it seemed to Margarita, evaporated straight away. After a few rubs, Margarita glanced in the mirror and dropped the canister right onto the glass of the watch, covering it in cracks. Margarita closed her eyes, then took another glance and burst into roars of wild laughter. End quote. I feel it's worth pointing out here that Bulgakov had lived through a morphine addiction and withdrawal, even writing a book about it entitled Morphine in 1926. He was also a doctor, so he understood chemical transformation very well. However, where morphine teases the user or abuser with the freedom that it never delivers, Azazello's cream does deliver freedom to Margarita, a freedom without withdrawal. Compare this to the Soviet medical approach of incarceration and sedation. Is Margarita mad? No, but then neither is Bezdomny. She finishes applying the cream, enjoying the feeling of freedom that's coursing through her body, and writes a goodbye note to her husband. The maid, Natasha, comes in and sees the transformation in Margarita. She stares greedily at the cream in the pot. Margarita tells her to take all her belongings after she's gone, except for the expensive jewellery, yet lest she be accused of theft. Margarita does a whole lot of staring at the moon while her neighbour Nikolai Ivanovich comes home and sits on the bench outside. Margarita greets him. Quote, "Ah, hello, Nikolai Ivanovich," said Margarita in a sad voice. "Good evening. Have you come from a meeting?" Nikolai Ivanovich made no reply to this. "Well, I'm sitting here alone, as you can see," continued Margarita, leaning out into the garden a little more, "pining, gazing at the moon and listening to the waltz." End quote. The phone rings. It's Azazello. He gives Margarita instructions to fly over Moscow, make herself invisible, and then head south to the river, where she's expected. Chapter 21, The Flight. Invisible and free. Margarita has to contain herself as she's learning to fly. It's a dangerous business. She flies along the Arbat at first floor level and almost comes a cropper when she hits an illuminated sign. I've got a map here showing Margarita's flight route in Moscow. She has fun with two women arguing in the kitchen of a third floor flat and then finds her way to the opulent building that houses the House of Dramatists and Writers, or Dramlit. Another of these Soviet-style contractions that they loved. She sees Latunsky's name on the list of tenants. This makes her scream in frustration, as it was Latunsky, the critic, who killed the master's writing career. She goes up to his flat and rings the bell, but he's out at Berlioz's memorial. She exits the building and makes her way in through an open window. And then I've got an image here of Margarita wrecking Latunsky's apartment by artist Hans Fronius. She smashes his baby grand piano with a hammer, an act that, as a musician myself, I must admit, makes me shudder. She continues to smash up the flat until a neighbour from downstairs comes up to find out what's going on. Margarita then flies out the window and starts smashing all the windows in the building, while the doorman blows his whistle. She ceases her spree of destruction when she sees a young boy on his bed, looking scared. She goes in and soothes him, telling him that it's boys with catapults, and that she's in his dream. Quote, "I'll tell you a story," Margarita began, and lay a heated hand on his closely cropped head. "There once was a lady, and she had no children, and generally had no happiness either. And so, at first, she cried for a long time, and then she became wicked." Margarita fell silent and took her hand away. The boy was asleep. End quote. And there's a fabulous image here of Margarita flying off to the ball by artist Marcin Miner. She flies off, up and away, turning somersaults. She's alone with the moon. She flies in a frenzy before realising that there's no rush, whereupon she slows down and takes in the experience. Just then, she hears the sound of a woman's raucous laughter. It's her maid, Natasha, on a flying pig. Of course it is. The pig turns out to be none other than Margarita's neighbour, Nikolai Ivanovich. Remember, we left him sitting on a bench in the garden. Quote, "Natashka," Margarita cried piercingly, "did you rub the cream on?" "Darling Natasha," replied, waking the sleeping pine forest with her cries. "My Queen of France, I rubbed it on his bald spot as well, didn't I? On him as well." End quote. The maid explains that after Margarita flew off, Nikolai Ivanovich came on to her. She's appalled. He's a married man. She dabs him with the cream and he turns into a pig. She asks Margarita if she'll ask that she be allowed to remain a witch, and Margarita agrees to grant her request. Margarita then arrives at a river and alights on the bank, whereupon she dives in. She enjoys a swim in the warm water and then sees another man on the bank. He's fat and drunk. He calls out to her, addressing her as Claudine. The footnotes in the Applin translation tell us who Claudine was. Quote, "Claudine, Countess of Tournon, 1520 to 91, was a lady-in-waiting to Marguerite de Valois." And remember that Natasha called her Queen Margot. Queen Marguerite de Valois, 1553 to 1615, Queen of Navarre and first wife of Henry IV of France, often referred to as La Reine Margot. It gets even more wacky. Margarita flies to the opposite bank to escape from the fat drunk man and lands to a chorus of frogs singing in her honour. The fat drunk man appears, having managed to dress in his tailcoat in the interim. A goat-legged man gives Margarita a flute of champagne and informs her that Natasha has flown off to Moscow on her hog to give advance warning of Margarita's arrival. The goat-legged man constructs a car and a chauffeur, a rook no less, wearing an oilskin cap and gloves, to convey Margarita to Moscow, and they fly off. Bronze sculptures. Sculptor Alexander Rukavishnikov won a competition to create a monument to Bulgakov in 1998. It was to be installed at Patriarch's Ponds and would feature characters from the novel. In addition to Koroviev, Behemoth, the Master, Margarita and the Magic Car with the Rook chauffeur, there were plans to decorate the pond with Pontius Pilate, Yeshua walking on water and even a huge Primus stove. The city cancelled the monument in 2003 after an open letter citing devildom. The Orthodox Church then blocked its installation at Sparrow Hills, owing to its being a burial site for plague victims. I've got a photograph here from bulgakovart.com of the car's interior, which is decorated with scales, and the passenger seat is a huge seashell. And finally, the driver himself is a rook wearing a waistcoat, tie, cap and gloves with buttons. There are other images of this at bulgakovart.com, and I urge you to go and look at them because it's absolutely fantastic. The statue of the Magic Car with its rook driver is now on the corner of Zemlyanny Val and Sivyakov Pereulok. Visit the location on Google Maps, and I've got a link here where you can go and check that out. And if you do Street View actually in Google Maps, you can get a look at the statue as well. The statue of Koroviev and Behemoth was installed at the Bulgakov House Museum on Bolshaya Sadovaya Street on the 15th of May 2011 to mark the 120th anniversary of Bulgakov's birth. Chapter 22, By Candlelight. The rook lands the car in a cemetery in the Dorogomilova district of Moscow, and Margarita meets Azazello there. I've got an image here of an old map from the publishing house Suvorin from 1915 that shows two cemeteries located on the banks of the Moscow River in the Dorogomilovskaya Sloboda. And then there's another map below, which is a screenshot that I've given you that shows where Moscow is in relation to the cemetery, and a village called Fili, which I'll explain just shortly. The old Jewish cemetery was destroyed during the reconstruction of Moscow. Readers of Tolstoy's War and Peace will be interested to learn that some of the dead from the Battle of Borodino were buried at this cemetery. Napoleon's troops marched through this area when advancing to and retreating from Moscow. General Kutuzov made the decision to abandon Moscow at a nearby village called Fili during Napoleon's invasion of 1812. The cemetery site is now home to Kutuzov Prospect, or Avenue. After rebuilding, this region was home to both Leonid Brezhnev, General Secretary of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, 1964 to 1982, and Yuri Andropov, General Secretary, 1982 to 1984. And I have an image here of Azazello meeting Margarita at the cemetery to escort her to the ball by artist Yevgeny Grichin. Together they fly off to number 302 bis Sadovaya Street, she on her broom and he on a rapier. They enter flat 50, which has been transformed into something otherworldly. They ascend a seemingly endless staircase and are greeted at the top by Koroviev, dressed in tails. They're in an immense hall. Koroviev comments on the darkness, informing Margarita that Messire doesn't like electric light. When Margarita comments on the size of the hall, Koroviev explains that it's no bother to expand space if you know how to work the fifth dimension. So that explains Doctor Who's TARDIS then. It transpires that Margarita is there to attend the spring ball of the full moon or the ball of the 100 Kings, and she is to be the hostess. Koroviev reveals to Margarita that she has royal blood, being the distant granddaughter of a 16th century Queen of France. He leads her to a door behind which is a small bedroom and two interesting candelabra, one with sockets in the form of birds' clawed feet, and the other with branches in the form of snakes. As Azello, Behemoth and Hela are in the room, Hela still naked. Behemoth and Voland are playing chess. Voland is on the bed, dressed in a dirty old nightshirt, and Hela is applying some hot muddy ointment to his knee. He's wearing a pendant in the shape of a black beetle with some characters carved on its back. The Russian text simply has the word zhuk, meaning beetle, but several translations have rendered this as scarab. The scarab beetle is an ancient Egyptian symbol of immortality, since it could survive the flooding of the Nile. It indicates Voland's connection to the ancient world predating Christianity. Voland greets Margarita as his queen. Quote, "I greet you, my queen, and beg you to forgive me my domestic attire." It's interesting that he meets Margarita for the first time while in such an apparently vulnerable state. His acolytes are in their ballroom finery while he's in a dirty nightshirt. It shows Margarita's being welcomed into the inner circle of Voland's retinue and illustrates Bulgakov's theme that good and evil coexist in the mundane, quotidian world. Unlike Soviet bureaucrats who show off their authority with uniforms and fancy Western goods, Voland doesn't need to do that. Behemoth is under the bed looking for a knight that he had dropped earlier. Voland orders him to come out, as now that Margarita's here, the game is cancelled. Margarita implores them not to stop playing on her account. Behemoth comes out with gilded whiskers and wearing a white dicky bow, and proceeds to talk a lot of, quote, verbal diarrhea. He denies this, stating that his, quote, series of soundly packaged syllogisms, end quote, would be appreciated by the philosophers of old, even Aristotle himself. It's a funny scene to imagine. And then there's a fantastic image here of Voland's retinue greeting the mistress of the ball, and only Behemoth is intently analysing a chess position. It's by artist Vladislav Pantelkin, who goes by Panadevich on Instagram, so you can check that out. The chess pieces are alive. Quote, "On the chessboard, meanwhile, there was a commotion. Utterly distraught, the king in the white cloak was stamping about on his square and throwing his arms up in despair. 3 white Landsknecht pawns with halberds were looking in dismay at an officer who was brandishing a sword and pointing ahead to where, on adjoining squares, white and black, Voland's black horsemen could be seen on 2 mettlesome steeds, pawing the squares with their hoofs." End quote. The game ends in a farce, and then it's time to dress for the ball. Voland complains of pain in his knee, and Margarita offers to apply the hot sludge, which she does. Voland explains that it's rheumatism. Quote, "My retainers assert that it's rheumatism," said Voland, not taking his eyes off Margarita, "but I strongly suspect that this pain in the knee was left me as a memento by a charming witch with whom I became closely acquainted in 1571 in the Brocken Mountains on the Devil's Pulpit." End quote. Remember the Brocken Mountains being evoked in our last instalment when we discussed Faust and the old Russian folk tales of Gogol's? Margarita is intrigued by Voland's globe. He explains that he prefers to use it to learn of world news and points out to her that a war has broken out in a certain region. Margarita looks closely and ends up zooming in like in Google Earth, or maybe more like an NSA satellite view. Quote, "The longer I talk with you," Voland responded courteously, "the more convinced I am that you're very intelligent. I can reassure you, He is uncommonly impartial and is equally sympathetic to both warring sides. As a consequence of this, the results for both sides are always identical too. Abaddon? Voland called softly, and at once from out of the wall there appeared the figure of a thin man in dark glasses. End quote. Abaddon represents the angel or demon of destruction and death, embodying absolute impartial annihilation. Voland praises his, quote, rare impartiality, end quote. He is equally sympathetic to both sides in any conflict or war, showing no favouritism. So the outcome, death and ruin, is identical for everyone involved. The name Abaddon directly references Abaddon or Apollyon from the Bible. It's his only appearance in the novel and illustrates Voland's authority in being able to summon this destructive force so easily, just to show off. Not only that, but he's able to protect Margarita from Abaddon, since he's wearing dark glasses. Azazello announces that Natasha has arrived on her flying pig. Quote, "Beautiful women do behave strangely," remarked Voland. End quote. It's midnight, time for the ball. And that's us at the end of this week's instalment. Lots of magical realism, lots of allegory, lots of looking at the Soviet system compared to this magic mayhem that's going on around us. It's absolutely brilliant, and I'm sure, as I am, you're looking forward to the ball. I wonder how that's going to go down. Do you think Margarita's going to enjoy it? Do you think she's going to meet the master at the ball? Wouldn't that be something? So, what a novel, readers. Isn't it great? Thanks for joining me on this installation, on this instalment of the Master and Margarita, and I'll see you next week for the next instalment, where we'll be reading chapters 23 to 25. So it's 23, 24, 25, 3 chapters. I'm looking forward to the ball. Follow me, reader. Za mной, читатель.